I often get asked if there's a shortcut to enlightenment. It kind of came to me that it is self-love. So there is a shortcut, and the shortcut is self-love. Because self-judgment, self-criticism, not accepting ourselves, thinking that we need to do something to be better or different, is likely the biggest obstacle to seeing our true nature. Because the true nature is love. So it's one of the biggest blockages, well, to our well-being, as well as to seeing our true nature, to awakening. But we do that. We think, okay, and if we're not this idealized version, then there's something wrong. There's these flaws that we then have to fix. So then we start doing the self-improvement thing, right? I have to fix all these things so that I can be this idealized version of what I have of an enlightened person. And what I'm saying is that's one of the biggest obstacles. We accept our flaws, we accept our unenlightened traits, whatever they might be. We accept it all. We accept ourselves just the way we are. Of course, as Suzuki Roshi says, you're perfect just the way you are, but you could use a little improvement. So that doesn't mean we don't, stop growing and developing and, learning and so forth. But in this moment, truth is available in this moment. If we accept ourselves just the way we are, we can see truth. So we have to look deeply at what's arising in ourselves and accept it all, not denying, not pushing it away, not kind of rationalizing it in some way, just total acceptance. And awakening can only occur when there's this complete and total self-acceptance and self-love. When I say completely, I mean completely. We accept everything, the flaws, the unenlightened parts, the unestimable parts. It's total self-acceptance. If we have seen inner connection, right? We've seen the truth of interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh puts it, the truth of oneness, the truth of dependent co-rising, as the Buddha would put it, which is his way of systematically explaining interconnection and oneness. If we've really seen that, we see that we cannot love anything without loving ourselves, because we are it. Can you see how that can be such a roadblock? We want to discover our true nature as love, but at the same time we're judging and not accepting ourselves. So there's a disconnect there. The largest, most significant obstacle to actually seeing our loving true nature in this moment. Ways to cultivate self-love. We do guided meditations, loving kindness meditations. Usually a loving kindness meditation begins with a person that we're close to, and then it goes to ourself. And I've heard people say in retreats and so forth that that's the most difficult part of it. It's actually easier to extend love to a stranger, because that's one of the steps. It is extending love to a stranger than it is to extend love to myself. So one way to kind of align our minds with reality is to extend those phrases and that field, that felt sense of love towards ourselves. And it sounds so simple, and it is, but just that aligning or inclining the mind in that way for that kind of period of time can be very transformative. Another way that I've found helpful is whenever you're about to do something, perhaps something challenging, you can say to yourself, what would someone that loves themselves do? In this moment, as I proceed into action, speech, and into deed, what would someone who truly loves themselves do in this next moment? And you can just kind of rest in it. And it's not a question that you're meant to think about or ponder with the mind. It's just a question you just drop. And often what happens is there's almost a flash response that will tell you what someone who loves themselves in your position in this instance might do. It's almost like the deeper intelligence, collective consciousness, just a flash of knowing about what someone who loves himself would do in that moment. So what would someone who loves themselves do? I played around with this for some months and found it transformative, helpful. And things did kind of come in a flash. Sometimes there'd just be a space, and then I would do nothing. Right? If I ask, what would someone who loves themselves do, and then collective consciousness or the deeper collective intelligence says nothing, then I did nothing. And found that that was actually perhaps the thing that was most constructive thing to do in that moment. So say you're sitting at home and boredom happens, or anything, impatience, anger, whatever we could fill in the blank. Some mind state, emotional state arises. It happens. And just ask yourself, boredom arises. What would somebody who loves themselves do? And then the flash might be, wash the car, I don't know, clean the house, have a nap, go for a walk the dog. Who knows what it might be, but just waiting, not searching for an answer, not figuring anything out, just kind of placing the question into the open space of awareness, and then proceeding. So what would somebody who loves themselves do? We have all these beliefs, and they're not just beliefs as thoughts in the mind. They're very intertwined with emotions and memory and so forth. These beliefs that were somehow flawed, were insufficient, unworthiness. Always. This is what it does. This idea of self. That we have these flaws, we're insufficient, we're unworthy in some way. And we have this evolved, what's called negativity bias, right? As we've evolved to survive, this negativity bias has developed because we're looking for, historically, for more physical threats. And to survive, you have to kind of be alert to threats. So there's this looking for bad things to happen. Of course, we haven't evolved past that, even though there, as is often said, there aren't animals chasing us for dinner. It's more social threats. But we have this negativity bias where we're always looking for something negative. We're focused on the negative, and we're not seeing the positive. Just kind of goes unnoticed. And so we develop these beliefs that there's something wrong with us. We're seeing all these flaws that we imagine these flaws in this being, and then we have a confirmation bias. We're constantly seeing things out in the world that then confirm that belief, which then solidifies that belief that there's something wrong. And a lot of this might come from childhood wounds, come from events in our lives that where these beliefs get built up, and then they just kind of solidify and become part of the story of who we think we are. Because after all, the egoic self is just a story, right? It's nothing more than a bunch of thoughts. Like, who would you be without the thought about who you are? with all the thoughts about who you think you are, who would you be? So all these thoughts, all these self-criticisms and beliefs about flaws are just part of the mind-constructed story about who you think you are. That's what the egoic self is. So when we have these beliefs, we're really stuck in this egoic state. And breaking free from this requires that we recognize it. So part of why I'm telling you this and giving you this talk is so that you can be aware that this is what's going on, so you can recognize when this story starts churning and doing its thing, and then you can investigate it, say, oh, is it true? Or is this just this mind-created story? It needs to be recognized and seen in order for us to break free from it and see through it. I found that when I began to really recognize these beliefs and these stories in my life, that they were able to, so I would just recognize them and hold them in awareness. They began to just dissolve, because I wasn't denying them, I wasn't stuffing them down as I had in the past. I was just, there's one of those self-judging thoughts, which is just a belief, part of a belief system, belief structure. And I could just hold it in awareness and just really just see it. And it would gradually, it was a process of actually watching it dissolve, the power of it diminishing. Another practice that might be helpful is to see what you're rejecting in yourself. What is it about yourself that you think needs to change for you to be a better person or more lovable? And you can actually just sit there and write them down. Just kind of go through, what am I rejecting in myself? What are these flaws that the little me thinks exists? What am I rejecting? You can just ask, what am I rejecting in myself? What about myself do I think needs to change? And just write down those, each item. And if you're having troubles coming up with the list, perhaps notice what you judge in other people. Because what you judge in other people, I've often said this, is really what you're judging in yourself, but you're projecting or mirroring. That's projection in psychology, and so it's a helpful way to actually see those hidden things about yourself that you're rejecting. I realized years ago that the people that irritated me the most were the people that I was judging, and it was something in myself that I wasn't seeing. So I really, like somebody that was irritating me in some way, I was really curious to get to know the person so that I could kind of find out what kind of hidden stuff was lurking there, that I could then go, because there's layers to this, right? You know, the onion analogy actually is quite true. You just keep peeling back layers of things that you are rejecting about yourself. So get this list, write it out. Either they'll come to mind from deeper intelligence, or you can perhaps bring some analysis into it and look at how you judge other people. And then you can look at how can I practice accepting these aspects of myself that I am rejecting. So holding them in the way that I was discussing previously. It's the second part of the practice. It's the A in the RAIN acronym: recognize, accept, investigate, nurture. So that's the A in rain. So we're accepting. We're accepting. You can even say to, I'm willing to love and accept my pain. I'm willing to love and accept this aspect that I've been rejecting, and hold it in that loving acceptance, much like you would hold a child, a baby. I can't wait. I'm going to be a tangent, a grandfather soon for the first time, and so I'm just imagining what it will be like to hold that baby. And so bringing that kind of love, if you already had that experience, or you've had babies. Sometimes when we hear the word self-love, self-acceptance, we think that might be contradictory with not self or selflessness. Like who's doing the loving and who's accepting what? Like if there's no self, then what's being accepted and who's doing the accepting? What I'm not saying here is that we love the illusion of ourself, right? That would just reinforce our sense of separation, right? Complete unconditional acceptance arises with awakening, and it includes self-love and self-acceptance. In fact, self-love and awakening are one and the same, because our true nature is love. So it's the same as awakening. When we see that we're an expression of the ultimate or the absolute or God, the divine, we accept ourselves. It just is. And we also accept everyone else, because we're all one consciousness. We accept humanity. We accept the human condition. And this sounds like a paradox, and we've talked about this paradox in this group. When we fully accept who we are, the ego is actually dissolved. When I talk about transcending the ego and the ego falling away, this is what occurred to me when I was sitting. When we totally, completely accept and love ourselves as we are, the ego has fallen away. Because the ego needs resistance and struggle to survive. Without the self-judgment and self-criticism, which is what the ego does, the ego's no longer there. I'll say that again. When we fully accept and love who we are, no ego remains.